This is just a reiterative class on Marxism. I know most of you missed the class today, and I'm just going to go over the basic topics that we've covered in the Marxism class today. In your syllabus, you'll find that there is a stress that has been laid on genealogy and definition, class and base, superstructure, dialectics, and interpolation. Now, first going by what is Marxism or where it came from, Marx, I don't want to go over the details of his biographical details because those you'll find in any of the books that I've already given you. Just his dates, 1818 to 1883. And basically he had come and gone before the two world wars, but he had anticipated the economic processes that were going to take place or that were going to be regulative in the times to come, in the pre and post-war situations in the 20th century. Now, he talked about Marxism as a meta-narrative which survived the postmodern blues of philosophy. He talked about the equality for all ideology, and he questioned the exploitative social structure. That is the most important point. He questioned the exploitative social structure. He stressed on strategies for the destruction of the exploitative economic operations of society. And his theory was positive. It was a positive philosophy. It envisioned the liberation of the proletariat or the working classes and emancipation of women from patriarchy. These are the 2 points that you have to keep in mind. First, he talked about the liberation of the proletariat from the clutches of the bourgeois exploitation, and also the emancipation of women or the development of the position of women in the patriarchal society. And he integrated the outlook of economy and sociology. And the one defining factor of Marxism is this, that it is very materialistic and it is not idealistic. But primarily, obviously, it was idealistic per se because he believed in such a situation or such a system where people would share the profits of production, and that is a little utopian or idealistic in view, but for him it held material benefits, and for him it was not idealistic, and the ideas of Marxism are derived from the world of matter, so therefore it is materialistic. Life, he said, is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. He said this in the German Ideology, the book by the name of German Ideology in 1846. And he talked about the principle of economic determinism, which means a final cause of all changes can be traced back to the economy of every epoch or age. So he says whatever changes, whatever historical changes have been brought about, every change can be traced back to an economic equation. He says that all changes happen because of some economic reason. There, he also talks about a social transformation which needs to take place in order for an egalitarian society to come about. He says that at this present point, under the capitalist system, there are two main classes. One is the dominant class and the one which is repressed or suppressed and exploited. So he says that the social transformation has to take place so that the working class or the repressed or the suppressed class can come at par with the dominant class, that the society turns into an egalitarian society. And his theory is excellently application oriented. It is not some abstract philosophy or theory. And his idea was this, that philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, he says, is to change it. So yes, we have the interpretations from the philosophers. They have defined the world in various ways, but we cannot live in the same world forever, and we cannot live in the same exploitative system forever, and therefore the system needs to be changed. Now, under this, what Marx found was that the society was, or the upper class of the society was very self-interest driven. The upper class, which he called the bourgeois or the bourgeoisie, he said that it is very self-interest driven, and there is government interference which is not required in capitalist production, and trade for man is capable of self-regulation. So trade economy has the capacity to regulate itself and regulate the society. So, what this means is this, that economy or economics can regulate social functions or social aspects. The society is run by economy. As he said in the past, that all social historical changes can be traced back to economy, and that happens because society is regulated by economy. Now, he also refers to the Hegelian dialectics. The Hegelian dialectics refers to three basic points. The first is the thesis, then the second is the antithesis, and then the synthesis. Now, what are these? Now, according to Hegel, he said that an agenda or centralized power system has two portions or two parts to it. It has, the first part is thesis, which he calls a threat. The second part is antithesis, which is the opposition of threat, which is a force against threat, and he uses the example of police or the army. And these two, when there is a conflict and then there is a resolution to the conflict, that leads to synthesis, which leads to society where there is a removal of freedoms of certain individuals or certain classes, and the power shifts from the hands of many people to the hands of a few people. So he says that for the purpose of the removal of threat from society, there has to be the presence of policing system, and this will also mean that there will be removal of freedom from the hands of many people, or the transfer of power from the hands of many people to the hands of a few people. So a few people will be ruling over many others. So there will be a ruling class, and then there will be a subject class. So that is what Hegel had said in terms of dialectics. So he used the words thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So thesis, that is a threat, antithesis, the forces against that threat, and synthesis is when a resolution happens in the conflict between the threat and the the forces against the threat. And he also included the philosophies of Utopian socialists like Saint Simon, Charles Fourier, Robert Owen, and he was inspired like them by the French Revolution. The French Revolution, if you go back to your history books, you will see that it had three main tenets. It had three main tenets, namely liberty, equality, and fraternity. So equality and liberty and fraternity, all these three tenets are very important in Marxian theory as well. He says that liberty is needed for the society, the part of the society which is not given freedom, and then only then will society be equal, and then there will be fraternity or brotherhood. So brotherhood will come only through freedom of all the classes, and freedom of all the classes will only come through equality, liberty, and liberty of all the classes from the clutches of the dominant classes. So again, let me just put it like this, that fraternity will come from equality, and equality will come from the liberty of all the classes from the clutches of the dominant classes. So if there is a dominant class, there will be no equality, and if there is no equality, there will be no brotherhood. So in order to establish brotherhood, you will have to have all the classes to be equal, and for all the classes to be equal, you need to have liberty, and liberty from the power equations of one particular class, dominant class. So like Saint Simon, Charles Fourier, Robert Owen, he also was inspired by the French Revolution, and he also talked about the egalitarian society just like the French revolutionaries. And he also talked about socialism, which would be attained by persuasion, by cooperating with others, by persuading others, and also through revolution or class conflict. So there are two ways in which Marx says that changes in society can come, equality in society can come. There are two ways he says that. First, he says that there can be a stage where the dominant class can be persuaded by the working class to give them equal powers. They can be persuaded, they try and convince them that we are equal to you, so why are you dominating over us. So that is one way in which egalitarian society can be established. But in most cases, obviously, that doesn't happen. The dominant class obviously is very self-interest driven and very greedy, and the greed is infinite, and therefore they will never give up the benefits of this economic system. So they most of the times do not agree with the fact that they should give equal powers to the working class. So when in case the persuasion doesn't work, what do the working class have to do? They have to go for revolution or class conflict. They have to engage in a class struggle. And Marx says that this is mainly political because it has the equation of power to it. You see, the dominant class will always have more wealth. They are the dominant class because they have more wealth. So once they have more wealth, they have more power. That is, power and economy, they are hardly differentiated in any of the societies nowadays, or rather in the future, in history. So we have seen that economy and power equations have always been running parallel to each other. So a person or a class like the bourgeois, when they have more wealth, they become more powerful. Now, once they become more powerful, they try and subjugate the rest of the classes. Now, because there is a question of power, so any revolution or any class conflict that takes place in order to remove the power from somebody's hands and to gain power by somebody, it turns political. So Marx says that a class struggle is required to destroy the capitalist system, and these class struggles are generally political. Why? Because there is a question of power. So removal of wealth of the bourgeois is not the only question. The question is also to remove the power of the bourgeois, so that the power and the wealth are equally distributed in all the classes of the society. So there remains no bourgeois, there remains no proletariat, but just one society where every individual there remains no class, so there is no question of class anymore. So every individual has equal wealth and therefore equal power. So only according to Marx, only this can only come either through socialism or persuasion, or through revolution or class conflict, which again, as I reiterate, that these class conflicts and these revolutions turn political because there is a question of transfer of power. Now, the changes that have been, suggested by Marx, he says that the greed of the capitalists, it is infinite, and under the present system, one class accumulates all the power, and the wealth of the society is not evenly distributed amongst all the classes. And this, he says, this system has to be dismantled for a greater good. Why a greater good? Because if there is too much power or too much wealth in the hands of a few, then there will be anarchy, there will be tyranny, there will be kind of a system where there's almost a Nazi system in place. If you have too much power in your hands, you will be able to do whatever you feel like without even justifying yourself. You will even be able to regulate the lives of living human beings, just like the Nazis did in Germany during the middle of the 20th century. So that is the bad aspect of capitalism, that if you have too much wealth, you have too much power, and you are free to do whatever you feel like without even justifying and without even having a rationale behind it. And so for the greater good, too much power and too much wealth in the hands of a few is not a possibility. So he says that the society, the classes, they have to conduct or engage in class struggles to bring down or dismantle this system. Then he talks about the dialectic change, and he says that materially induced destitution, when you deprive a particular class of certain materials, certain benefits, that is not the ideal system of existence. And when you deprive a particular class despite the fact that they are also equal to you, that does not encompass an ethical means of existence, and a movement should be conducted so as to renovate this social system. So he says that when a particular class is materially deprived, that class has to engage in struggle, so that they have to engage in movement, in revolutions, in mass movements, to bring about social change, so that an egalitarian system can be established. So, at the end of everything, what Marx is trying to say is that an egalitarian society has to be established, and for that, the wealth has to be equally distributed amongst the individuals living in that society. When the wealth will be equally distributed, the power will also be equally distributed. So, no person will have more power over another person, and no person can be no person can regulate the life of any other person or existence of another person. And it is not just about this individual a person, but also the environment, history, society, culture, everything. When you are dominant, you try to regulate all these things, but when you have equal the entire society has equal powers, so everybody will have the right to say what they want from society or from existence. So that is what Marx at the end of the day is trying to say. So, for that, he goes on to say that there is a presence of conflicting forces. So, he says that reality of existence, the reality of existence encompasses this idea that there are conflicting forces in society. There will always be a powerful aspect of society, and there will always be an aspect of society which is deprived. And if the deprived aspect or the deprived class, they take up a struggle against the dominant class, the depriving class, there will always be a change. Change is inevitable. And he says that it is because of the presence of these conflicting forces in society that change becomes inevitable. He says that no system is permanent. Marx says that no system in society, no aspect of society is permanent because of the presence of internal conflicting forces. He criticizes Feuerbach's materialism, and he says that it is men that change circumstances, and the educator himself needs educating. He also says that social justice, it can be ensured by force, because beneficiaries of a particular system will try to protect that system forever. I had given this example in class that there are two shops in a locality. You go to one shop, you know that shopkeeper, the shopkeeper gives you and you alone some discounts. You go to the other shop, you buy things just like anyone else at the marked price. Now you get a particular benefit from a particular shop. You go there, you buy those things at a lower rate. The others, they don't get that discount. Now you are benefiting from a particular shop. You gain some benefits from that shop because you know that shopkeeper. That shopkeeper is your friend or some relative, or for whatever reason you are given those benefits from that by that shopkeeper. But the other customers, they don't get that discount. Now there are two things that can happen. The first thing that can happen is that more and more people will be led away from this shop, but you will never want that shop to close down, because others are not getting the same benefits that you are getting from that particular shop. They will go to the other shop. Now that shop will grow in business, and this shop obviously will not grow in business because lesser number of customers are coming to it. So it might so happen that there is a possibility that this shop from where you are getting the benefits, it will close down. But you will never want that shop to close down. Why? Because you are getting benefits from that shop. You don't want to go to the other shop. Why? Because you will not get the discount in that shop which you are getting here. So you are the bourgeois here, and the other people are the proletariat. So you are getting from a system, you are getting certain benefits, and you will never want to have that system closed down. So what do the proletariats have to do? They have to do it by force. They have to close down that shop by force. They have to either just break that shop, or they have to just threaten that shopkeeper that you have to give us more discount, otherwise we will go to the other shop. They can threaten that particular shopkeeper. or else they can just move away from their shop altogether and go to some other shop to buy things. So basically, the proletariat, by two means, they can, negotiate with the bourgeois from the people, with the people who are getting the benefits of a system. They can either, negotiate with them persuasively, or they can do it by force. So the beneficiaries, the people who get benefits from a particular system, they will never want that system to close down. Like you don't want to get that shop closed down. But the people who do not get any benefits from the system will always struggle to, close down or dismantle that particular system. So he says that social justice can be brought about by force. Now, what is the relevance of Marxism here? He says that inequality, despite all the theories and all the philosophizing that he has been doing and his followers have been doing for so long, inequality in society still exists. The changes have been very slight. In fact, in certain cases, the changes have not happened at all, and the capitalist system has only aggravated. The society is yet to set from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So Marx had this very beautiful idea, which I was just discussing in class. That he said that towards end of the 18th century, when industrial revolution happened in England, certain people lost their jobs, and especially in the agricultural sector, certain people they did not have to work in the fields anymore. So if there were, say, 10 people working in a particular field before the industrial revolution, because of the coming of machines, only maybe 5 people had to work in the fields, and that number actually dwindled with time, 5 to 3 to 2 to 1. So where 10 people were working in a particular field, because of the coming of machines, only one person could work in that field with the help of those machines. So 9 people were left out of job. So Marx had this wonderful idea that okay, fine, that's all right, there's no need to worry. The 9 people who are not working, they should just rest, they should just enjoy their leisure, and the profits which are gained by this one person who is working all day with the help of the machines and everything, he may share the profits of his business with the people who need the money. The need comes from the fact that they don't work. So the 9 people who are not working get the benefit of the profit of the one person who is working with the machine, because according to Marx, this machine has replaced these 9 people. So these 9 people have the right to enjoy the benefits of the labors of this machine, just like this one person who is working in the field with the machine. So that was his wonderful idea, but that simply didn't work out, obviously, because that's a utopian situation. Nobody would want to share the profits and benefits. Why would they? Because they are putting in the labor and they are working in the field all day. So why would they want to share the benefits? And since they did not share the benefits, the capitalist system arose, and the 9 people were left out of jobs. So he said that the system has to change from the benefits reaped by the people with ability to the benefits reaped by the people with needs. So he said that the profits of a particular societal economy or social economy, the total profits of any economy should be distributed equally amongst the people who need the money or the wealth. So the people who are working and the people who are not working should enjoy the same benefits of economy, because they all need money or wealth to sustain themselves, and wealth should not be accumulated in the hands of only a few people, and the rest of the people should not be deprived of that wealth, because for some of the other reason the economy has replaced these people with some kind of technology. Now the benefits of technology should also be enjoyed by the people who have been replaced, or the working class, or the proletariat. And he said, he brought out this point in one of the books called Critique of the Gotha Program in 1875. He says that capitalist economy is propelled by profiteering. Very obvious. The capitalist system survives on profits. A person who enjoys profits and a person who doesn't enjoy profits. So the equation of power changes with the sharing of profits. The person who enjoys more profit enjoys more power. The person who doesn't enjoy profits doesn't have any power, and that is the capitalist system. It is propelled by profiteering. It ignores the question of distribution. The capitalist system, Marx says, it ignores the question of distribution. The costs and risks of the industrial economy are to be socialized, he says, with eventual profits privatized. He says that the distribution of profits should be equal. No matter which class you belong to, no matter how you are contributing to the society, the profits need to be distributed equally, especially among the people who actually need it, who do not have anything. Some people have many, and some people don't have any. So the transformation or the transfer has to happen from the many to the not any. Okay. Now, women's emancipation, as I had mentioned earlier, that is another point that Marx brought out in terms of his theory. He says that women's emancipation is still unachieved, especially obviously during the time when he was working. And he says that it is possible only when women are enabled to take part in production on a large scale, social scale, reducing their domestic load. According to Engels, and Engels brought this point out in The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State in 1884. Now, this is a book that I think you should go through in your leisure time, because it's a very important highlighting of how women can be emancipated in terms of social and economic position that they faced or they resided in during those times and even today. At this point of time, you may say that women's emancipation has happened to a certain extent, yes, but that again has happened because of the certain theoretical paths that have been laid down in the yesteryears. And then he goes on to talk about imperialist exploitation, which happens despite liberal humanist preaching. Liberal humanism he describes in this way. He says that it looks upon man, liberal humanism, the system looks upon man as somebody divested of class. Divested means somebody who has been stripped of the idea of class, status, social origin. When a person is not known by his class, or his status, or his social origin, that is liberal humanism. So despite the fundamentals of liberal humanism being present in society, being present in common knowledge, yet people do not practice this system. He says that man should be known by his not by his class or status or social origin, but by the contribution that he makes in society, and by the very fact that he is a man, or he's a person. A person must be treated as a person and not as a person belonging to a particular class or status or social origin. It doesn't matter where he belongs, it just means that he is a person of this, or an individual unit of the society, that he is an equal partner in the social setting. The scope of Marxism. All these you will find in the PowerPoint presentation. I'm just trying to elaborate on these. Marxist theory can explain the role of culture and ideology, and the roles in society, and why were they created. Now, why were these cultural and ideological and economic premises created? To sensitize and not blindfold the society. See, culture and ideology, the role that they play in society sums up to this, that they are supposed to be weapons or instruments to be used by society to sensitize people of the various pros and cons, of the various advantages and disadvantages of the systems that are prevalent in society. So, for example, a society has certain systems. Now, those systems may have certain good things and certain bad things. Now, culture, ideology, the role of these things is to expose or tell people that that the system that you are living in has these advantages and these disadvantages. So basically the role of culture, ideology, and all these accessories or social functionaries is this, that they have to sensitize people and have to make them aware of the workings of the various aspects of the system that they are residing in. Okay, but in most cases, culture, ideology, they are used to actually blindfold people. They are used to manipulate people into believing certain things. You can take the example of certain media houses nowadays. So media houses, they will report a particular news in only a particular way, with a bias. Say they are working in favor of the government, so they will tell you that this a certain thing has happened, and they will tell you, oh, this is a very good thing, the government plans to do so and so, such and such, they have plans to do such and such things, and these are the advantages of the incident that has happened, and so and so. But there might be certain media houses which are against the government, so they will tell you, oh, no, whatever the government has done is completely bad. They are conspiring against the public, they're doing this thing, and that thing, and whatever. So certain biases work in terms of these accessories, social accessories, and they are used to nowadays blindfold people into believing certain things, rather than say, getting sensitized, getting aware. Making people aware of things and blindfolding people are two different things. Awareness means you are aware of all the aspects of a particular thing. So there is a product in the market, you will know that these are the advantages and these are the disadvantages. So you are aware of the product. But when a certain company advertises a product, they will only show you the good things about the product. They will never tell you that there are certain side effects of this product. So that is how you are blindfolded into believing that the product is good. So basically culture and ideology, they are now used to blindfold people, and Marx says that that is not the role of culture or society, culture or ideology. He tries to shed light on social interpellation. Now, interpellation I'll just get into in a moment. And he also probes the questions of value which are enforced or challenged in a particular text. He says that a text should enlighten. A text means a part of culture, a part of ideology, which should enlighten people on class dimension of values and ideas. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen most of the times. A text is manipulated into presenting something in a particular way, in either a bad way or a good way. So you are made to believe that something, anything is either bad or it's good. And he also suggests that we reject any morality based on extra human and extra class concepts. And this was actually said by Lenin, taking from Marx in the tasks of the youth leagues in 1920. And he says that human beings have the tendency of not believing any aspect which doesn't belong to the social scenario. We do not take into account, or we reject any morality which is based on extra human and extra class concepts. So beyond human or beyond class concepts are generally rejected by human beings, but at certain points they become very important premises on which the society works. So nothing needs to be, or nothing can be, or nothing should be rejected because they are not part of a particular system. Anything that benefits our understanding of existence, anything that helps us to understand why we are existing, how we are existing, how we can exist, so anything that can answer these questions should be taken into account, but the problem is that we are conditioned in such a way, we are trained in such a way socially and otherwise, that we do not take into account these extra or beyond human or beyond class concepts. So this was propagated by Lenin. Okay, and Marx also wanted to sensitize the minds to the process of commodification of people or nature. So why did he produce this theory in the first place? Why did he write so many books on commodification, on communism, on egalitarian society, and so things? So why did he do that? Because he wanted to make people aware that people in the present capitalist system, people as well as nature, environment, were being used as commodities, that people were being used as products or resources in a product. When you are working in a factory, for example, you are regarded as an aspect of production and not a human being. You are a worker who comes to work, who sits at the machine. It may be a computer or any kind of machine. So you are sitting at the machine all day, you are doing your job, you are operating that machine, and you are producing something. So and at the end of the day or at the end of the month, you are paid your wage and you're gone. That's all. So when the product is finally produced and it is sold in the market, your face is not on the product, your name is not on the product. You are just a part of the production costs. Your wage or salary is just a part of the production costs. So you are part of the commodity. You are not a human being. And nature is obviously used in such a way as well. Nature obviously all the more, because nature does not have a way to retaliate physically, or so we believed. Not now anymore. Anyway, so he wanted to sensitize the minds of the people regarding the commodification of people and nature. He wanted to help people understand why economic implications are suppressed or peripheralized in certain texts. He wanted to show people that certain texts or certain cultural aspects, they did not highlight these suppressive forces, because these aspects of culture were also commodified, and these aspects of culture were also a part of, or weapons used by the dominant classes. So he wanted to make people aware of that you should not believe everything that culture is telling you. You should not believe all the ideologies. You should not believe everything that is taught to you. You have to question. You have to logically ascertain, logically analyze everything that comes your way, because if you do anything unquestioningly, you are giving or surrendering yourself to that particular system, and that is dangerous. So he says that certain texts or certain cultural aspects, they peripheralize or they suppress the implications of economy on social classes. They don't tell you that it is wrong that you are being suppressed. They don't tell you that it is wrong that you are a bourgeois, that you have too much money or power in your hands. They don't tell you that. So that has to be recognized. So that is one role of art that we're going to discuss later, that it has to sensitize people about the truth. And he also tries to make us recognize the potential of art in social transformation, as I said. That it is a role of art to expose these hidden truths which are generally brushed under the carpet by the dominant classes of the society. They don't tell you certain things. They don't, most of the times they lie to you, but there are also things that they don't tell you. That is also equal to lying. So they will not tell you that you are suppressed. They will not tell you that you are equal to them. They will not tell you that you also have the right to enjoy equal benefits of the product that you are producing. They will not tell you these things. So it is a job of the art to tell you that. It is a job of the art or culture to tell people or sensitize people regarding these aspects of production. He also says that there is a need to promote critical, resistant reading of literature. So he says that you cannot believe everything that literature is telling you. Everything that literature is telling you has to have certain dimensions, what you're reading may not always be the intention of the author. You have your own interpretation of a text. You're reading a text, you're reading a poem. You have your own interpretation of a poem, and that not might not be the intent of the author or the poet, intended meaning of the poet. So the poet may have meant something completely different here, and you're understanding something completely different. Now, what Marx is trying to say is that because of your social training, because the training that you've been given, you're going to read the text like that. So if you belong to the proletariat group, I mean the suppressed group, you will always read a particular poem, say, okay, the poem is telling you that proletariat system or the proletariat class has to always remain a proletariat class, that they do not have the ability to come to equal terms with the bourgeois, that they don't have the capacity to rise above their present status, and they have no ability to regulate the society per se. So that if that poem is telling you that, if you belong to the proletariat class, you generally will read it like that, you will believe that. But what Marx is telling you, that no, you shouldn't believe that. If the text is telling you that, you should question, why are you saying this, why is the poem saying this, or why is the poet saying that? If I do not have the ability, why is that? How do you know that? Is there a way in which you can prove that I don't have the ability? Is there a way in which you can say, for instance, that I will never be able to rise above my status? There are many families we know around us. This is just an example. There are many families around us we know who do not come from very, strong financial backgrounds. But children from those, families have, at many times, very often, they have risen above their social status, financial status, and they've studied hard, they've gained much skill through their lifetimes, and they have established themselves as very eminent personalities. And there are a number of examples that I can produce, even in very well-known names for that matter. So you cannot tell a person that you do not have the ability to rise above your status at present. Whatever your status is at present, you cannot tell that person that you're going to live in that status for, you're going to suffer in that status forever. You always have the right or the ability or the chance to move out of that or go beyond that status and prove yourself to be of much more benefit to the society and to yourself. So that is what the role of the art is, according to Marx. And he says that the text or culture, it has the ability to give us insight for explaining the modus operandi and interrelation of other exploitative structures like gender, class, race. So the role of culture is also to not only expose the modus operandi or the modes of operation of the economic dominant structures, economic dominant forces, but also some other structures like gender, class, race. So culture has the ability to expose these structures. Now these structures remain operative because they are not challenged. Now it is the role of culture or role of art specifically to challenge the superiority of these structures or of the dominant aspects of these structures. For example, the bourgeois superiority in economy, the patriarchal superiority in gender, the racial superiority of the white supremacists. So these things have to be challenged, and they have to be challenged by culture. It is the role of the culture as per Marx. Now he talks about certain very key aspects. I'm going to talk about them very quickly. He talks about, or he explains, class, which he says is a loaded term signifying the position in social hierarchy determined by position of wealth. So what is your class? Your class is basically your position in society depending on the amount of wealth that you have. It is not caste. Class. Caste is completely different from, Because people, I'm saying this because people generally mix these things up. Caste and class are completely different things. Caste is completely social and class is completely economic. So, class is, it's a loaded term which signifies the position of an individual in society, in the hierarchy of society, determined by the possession of wealth, determined by how much wealth you have. So if you have more wealth, you have a higher position in society. If you have less wealth, your position is lower. Now, Marx says that exploitation creates class by polarizing the people. Polarizing poles, as you know, two different extremes. We have the north and the south poles, like that. So people are polarized by exploitation. Exploitation creates class by polarizing the people into the bourgeois and the proletariat. The ownership, which is private property, this kind of private ownership actually sustains class. There will be no class discrimination if there is no system of ownership. I mean, if there is not no system of ownership, but no system of dominant ownership. Say, if a person is allowed to own only a limited number of things, then there will be more resources or more opportunities for others to be owners as well. Say, for example, there are 10 boxes and there are 10 people, or say 8 people. So there is one person who gets 3 boxes. So how many are left? 7. And then there are 7 people. So 10 boxes, 8 people, one person owns 3 boxes. How many left? 7 boxes and 7 people. Now one person, the second person owns 2 boxes. How many left? 8 people. But boxes left? Sorry, I'm